Hey, y'all. Happy Sunday. Hope everybody's doing well today. And hope everybody is having a good weekend, made the time change, and got everything going as far as that's concerned. I know I totally forgot about it. And then when I looked down a little earlier at the clock and went, or actually walked out into another room into one of the clocks that doesn't automatically change and went, what? And then I thought, oh no, time change. So I hope everybody made the time change. Let's see who we've got over here in the chat. We got Steve, Webmaster to the Stars over at Harneal Media. We've got Jim, Ronald Ledger, Kevin Ells, David Krause, Troy Pritchard. Good morning, y'all. Or good afternoon now, officially, since it's 12:01 Pacific time. We're going to do a question and answer, and I'm going to get into Aspire here in a minute to further explain a little bit on the texturing toolpath. Basically, I said I would explain a couple of things and then promptly forgot what I was going to explain, so gave up on that in the video. And then reviewing it back, it's like, oh, yeah, that's what you were going to get into. Basically, a little bit more in depth into the overlap and the step over and what the difference is between them. It's They're subtle differences. They're kind of hard to tell what they do and what the difference between them is. It's one of those cases of you just kind of adjust it and play with it until it looks good to you. So I see we have a couple more folks joining us. Tim Halcomb, Rockin' Woodworks, Eloy Escojedo, my partner in crime on the Trampled Underfoot podcast. If you follow me on Facebook, you've seen my posts about the Trampled Underfoot podcast. Eloy and I get together. We talk about everything and nothing all at the same time. It's got nothing to do with making anything. It's got everything to do with life, the universe, and everything else. So join us. Check it out. I think you'll have some fun. Chris Graves and Robert Petrie. All right. Welcome aboard. Thanks for joining in. I think what I'll go ahead and do before I start getting into questions is I'm going to go ahead over to Aspire and get into Aspire and do a little bit better job of explaining what the step over and the overlap is. And I'm going to do this without doing my pocketing tool paths over here just to save time, because I keep forgetting that I have to do the pocketing tool paths before I do the texture, and things just don't work out right. So if I have to go back and reset. So anyway, I'll go into my texturing toolpath. And what I'm going to do right off the top is I'm going to bring my variation down to 0 and my step over variation down to 0. Now, something that I didn't explain that I do need to explain is, for instance, on the step over here, you have to have a value entered in here. If I enter a 0 value in the step over, my calculate button is grayed out. You have to have a value in here of something larger than 0. So if I put in 1,000th of an inch, that's a tiny, tiny step over. Now I can calculate the toolpath. But if I have nothing in there, a value of 0, it won't let me calculate the toolpath. There has to be a step over. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll set this back to, I had, let's see, 90 thousandths I believe I had in here. And I'm going to change, I've changed my maximum cut length to 4 inches and my minimum cut length to, Let's see if I can get that up to 2 and, whoops, wrong way. Yeah, right close to 2 3/4 inches to get longer cuts. And I'll just run this as is so we have a something to compare it to. And let this run for a little bit. I won't do the whole thing. Just as a brief aside, if you ever want to stop a toolpath while it's previewing, you've got this little X right here in the bottom. Just click on that and it'll stop your preview. So let me zoom in, and we see by taking these longer cuts what kind of a texture pattern we have here. So let me go ahead and undo that. We'll go back into the texture, and I'm going to take my overlap down to 0 and leave my step over. I'm going to set that down to 1,000, and we'll calculate it. My button is working, or my button is there, but it's not letting me calculate. I have to have an overlap as well. So let's try 1,000 and see if that'll do. It will. Okay, we're calculating the tool path. I want to try to get as straight as I can so I can demonstrate what the overlap and the step over actually do. And it's deciding to take its time to calculate. You now know why I go ahead and fast forward my video when it's calculating and when it's previewing. Okay, when you see how small I made that step over, you see how dense that toolpath is. Let me zoom out. With that small of an overlap and that small of a step over, you're putting those toolpath lines almost one on top of another. So let me back that out, and let's take that overlap way out. That was 1,000th of a percent, by the way, not of an inch. Let's take that back out to 100% and see what that does. It's not going to allow me to do my overlap of 100%. Let's try 90%. And we'll calculate that. And it's going to take a long time to calculate. So meanwhile, back at the ranch, while we're waiting on that to calculate, you can see how playing around with numbers here not only affects the final tool path, but it affects your calculations time as well. And this is going to take a little while. Holy cow. With an overlap of 90%, with a step over of 1,000, holy cow. We're only up to 31% calculated. This may be a long Q&A. My point in doing all of this was to try to illustrate better what the overlap does and what the step over does, because they are two different controls. The overlap is the percentage of one cut that the current cut can overlap. So we're not even up to halfway calculated yet. Wow. This is taking way, way too long. This is taking way, way too long. I should have come up with some interlude music for this. I didn't realize it was going to take this long. I've got a lot of stuff going in the background, though. We're not even halfway there. And, well, I could abort this, but I'm not going to. I'm more than halfway. We'll stick through. While this is doing that, let me go back over to YouTube, see what's going on here. Let's see. Jim Hester says, super video this morning. I've had limited success with signs like that because I didn't understand how the overlap and step over affect the cuts. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to demonstrate right now. but it's taking its sweet time about calculating the tool path. So the the step over, basically it'll kind of send the bit at angles as it's cutting at one end or the other. It can step over into the previous cut. The overlap, the entire cut blends in with the previous cut. So that's kind of what I'm trying to show here. I'm just taking it's just taking its sweet time in doing it. It's about 90%, so we'll see what happens. Now, let's see here. Troy Pritchard wants to know, is the angle option just a way to change the angle of the cuts? Yes, that's it's exactly what it is. It changes the angle that your bit runs back and forth. Uh, I use an angle of 0 to get it to move on my X. And in doing that, it I tend to mount my material so that the grain is running left to right. And depending upon the material, I want to cut with the grain. Sometimes I want to cut at a 45-degree angle with the grain. And other times I want to go up and down across the grain. That's what that raster angle is. And that's not just in this tool path. It's in just about all of the tool paths, be it pocketing toolpath if you're using a raster strategy, or a 3D roughing or finishing. You can adjust the raster angle, and basically that's which direction the bit is running. So let's see if this is ready yet. And it doesn't appear to be. Uh-oh. I think it may have locked up a spire. I may have to shut it down and restart it. Yep, I think I'm going to have to shut it down and restart it. Well, that's okay. Now I know not to do that. All right, cancel. Let's see what we got going here. Can I? No. Okay, it locked up a spire. That's okay. Live and learn. Let's shut it down. Oh, I do so love technical issues. But what can I say? I'll start it over again, and we'll go for a little bit more reasonable numbers here. Jim Hester also, I hadn't noticed the overlap was in percent. Yeah, it is in percentage. It's not a measurement. Chad M, we did the texture a few months ago with those home sweet home signs. Yeah, that home sweet home sign is actually pretty popular. I was surprised. And I can see how that would make for a very cool sign. So let me do the 3 fingers salute here and get rid of a spire. Let's end task. And all right, there we go. Now I'll load her back up here. I do so love live entertainment. Okay, let's try this again. We will go over to Aspire, and let me make sure that I am actually streaming here. Yes, I am. Okay. Now we'll go into the 3D view. I'll maximize my 3D view. I have to select those, go over to the Toolpath tab, and we'll get into the texture. Okay. Step over, we're going to set at, what did I have it set at before? Let's go with let's go for 50 thou and a max overlap of 50%. I'm going to change my cut length to, let's make it pretty big. Let's make it 6 inches with the minimum length of 4 inches. And I'll calculate it. And now I'll go ahead and preview it. Now, with those settings of running about halfway, I'll go ahead and stop it now. We can see that for the most part, the toolpath is fairly straight. Now I'll go ahead and turn on the toolpath and zoom in here so you can see the dark blue lines are cuts. The red lines are rapid moves. And when I reset, so you can get a better look at just the toolpaths, the lines are fairly straight. When it's cutting, there are a few little variations here, but not much. The cuts are, for the most part, pretty straight. So when I go in and I raise my overlap to, let's say, 60%, and that's all, we'll calculate that. We can see the blue lines again are the cuts. You can see how there's a little bit of an overlap between this cut and this cut. And the same down here. And it, like I says, the software randomizes the numbers I set in the toolpath. It can be anywhere from, let's see, the variation, maximum overlap of 60%, and it will make that variation 75% of the time. So you can see all these dark blue lines. That's where the toolpath is overlapping. So now seeing that and seeing how they're still more or less straight, let's go back into the step over and let's bump that step over up to 100 thou. And I'm going to bring the variation up a little bit more so that you can see the difference. We'll calculate that. And now if you notice, the lines are a little bit further apart. They're not quite overlapping as often, but we have more jagged rapid moves. So the bit will come back over here, which is the overlap, then lift up and do a rapid move to come back here, stepping over that amount. So I hope that does a little bit better job of explaining how the step over and the overlap work. Like I said in the video, there really is no right or wrong way of doing this. You just have to kind of get in and play with it. And if you want longer cuts, adjust those up here. If you want further overlap and a smaller step over, let's try 0.2, calculate that, and you'll see how that step over increased. So we've got a cut here and then a retract and then cut here. You can get a little bit better idea of which direction those cuts are going and what each one of those controls do. So 3, calculate, and that opened it up even further. So let's see what that looks like here. Yeah, that's much more random, a lot more wide, and we've got areas in there that are not carved at all. So, and without those pocket toolpaths, my lettering is an absolute mess. But that's okay. So you start to get the idea as to what's going to happen with step over and overlap. Overlap is basically in X and step over is basically in Y. So, all right, let's go back to your questions and answers. Let me see what's going on over here. Mohammed Dalan, is it possible in the future to explain about the bits more and what to use for engraving, cutting, modeling, etc.? I did a video either earlier this year or late last year on bits that in my opinion, I think most beginners need uh, to see you through just about any project that a beginner would want to take on. When this goes live, I'll put a link in the description box below to that video. Um, it's hard to get into what bits are needed for every specific circumstance um, unless I'm actually demonstrating that type of a project. I keep saying I'm going to get further and further into projects, and I am trying to do that. You'll notice a lot more project videos coming up here lately. I'm going to continue to do that. So I am going to be doing a couple of engraving type videos, but for the most part, the bits are very similar for engraving versus V carving. The difference is subtle, but it's there. I run a CNC router. I don't run a mill, and I don't run an engraver. So, and I'm not a metal person. So I've not done any engraving in metal at all. So there are quite a few similarities, but there are just enough differences that it does make a difference. So I'll put up that video on the bits that I think most beginners should have to see you through most projects. I'll put a link to that in the description box below, and then you can kind of comparison shop from there. Let's see. Steve at Harneo Media wants to know, is there a way to randomize the texture other than running multiple texture toolpaths? Randomize the texture in what way? I mean, are you trying to get it to go into a certain direction, or are you trying to get it to go um, in a specific pattern or something like that? I'm going to do a slight little bit of a spoiler alert here. You were in the hangout with me last night. This is Inside Baseball, y'all. You were in the hangout with me last night, Steve, when Patrick from the Patrick's Workshop, he showed that box that had a texture in a pattern. I'm going to get into that and try to do a video on that, because that, I think, was a seriously intriguing pattern. So I'm going to try to do that. Let's see. Okay, follow-up is different cut angles, more like hand-carved. That's getting into the step over and the overlap. If you're talking about cutting some at straight across at a 0 angle and then coming back and do some more at like a 10-degree angle, you would probably need to do multiple tool paths, because I don't think you can randomize the angle. So you can randomize the width and the overlap, but you can't randomize the angle, I don't think. I'm gonna have to dig into that and see. Let's see. John Kroger, Mohammed has a good question. Mark, could you let us know where you buy your bits and what kind of bits do you use? In the video I was talking about, and also last week's video, the tapered ball nose. I'll put links to both of those in the description here. I put links to all the bits that I show in the video, so you can go in and comparison shop yourself. So I don't really have any brand loyalty. I talk to people and I listen to folks and I find out what they're using, and just kind of gauge by that. There are some manufacturers that are real proud of their bits and they charge accordingly. And there are other manufacturers that believe in selling volume, not necessarily high-priced pieces. So they're a little bit more reasonably priced. I don't really, like I say, have any brand loyalty. I've got no problem with a no-name from Amazon or eBay. I've used several. A lot of my bits are no-names. But The reason I put the links in the description to the bit that I'm talking about is so that you can see exactly what I'm using and you can comparison shop from there. So let's see, Chad M, using different bit like V bits or ball nose bits gives you different outcome on textures. Yes, you're absolutely right, Chad. I hadn't gotten into that yet, but you can use a V bit with a texture toolpath and get some a real interesting appearance that way. And you can combine things. You know, I did the pocketing toolpaths with just standard 1/8 inch bit with a 1/4 inch for larger area clearance. Well, you can also, after all of that is done, you can select that vector and do another profile pass on the vector half the depth. So in that case, it would be 0.05, 50 thousandths with a 90-degree vit. And that'll kind of give you a little bit of a chamfer around that inside profile. You can do that same thing on the text. Do a profile toolpath, 50 thou with a 60-degree V-bit for the sake of argument, and it would just chamfer the edges of the text. There's all kinds of little things you can do with that. You could even do another texturing toolpath in a different direction, texture the text itself, say 20 thousandths deep. There are no rules. You know, so long as your bit is capable of making the cut and your feeds and speeds are set for you for your material, for your machine and everything else, you can just get in and experiment. And that's what the preview is for. I mean, try it out in different directions. You might prefer to use a raster angle of 90 degrees so that the texture is running up and down rather than across the grain or with the grain. You know, there is no right or wrong. So, see, Harneal Media, you need to do a Christmas wish list explaining what bits do what and set it up so that people can print out a wish list. One of two things has just happened, Steve. Either you talk to my wife or you two are on some telepathic level, because her and I were talking about doing just that. So, Michael, I am not going to butcher your last name. I have too much respect for you. Is it possible to swap X and Y axis on Vectric VCarve Pro for work with Yeti Tool Smart Bench? I don't know what that is. There is a Y horizontal axis, and I have to make all the time turn my projects 90 degrees. Yeah. No, there's not any way to change that as the default in VCarve. That's an industry standard, basically. When you're standing in front of your machine in its normal operating position, X always goes from side to side, and Y always goes from front to rear. Z always goes up and down. That's just standard everywhere. That's in every piece of software I have ever seen. Some people make the confusion of the spindle or router moving across the gantry. That is the X-axis. Not necessarily. My first CNC machine, it was oriented, it was turned sideways so that the gantry moved back and forth on the X-axis, and the spindle / router moved across the face of the gantry on the Y-axis. That's what decides it, not what some company has decided they want to name theirs. I know the laser folks who are used to using like the K40 and what have you, they get that confusion all the time. But that's the industry standard. It's in every piece of software and in a lot of just imaging software. If you open up Photoshop and you watch your cursor, look down at the bottom right, you will see X and Y numbers move. X moves when you move from side to side. Y moves when you move up and down. It's the same way on a mill or a CNC, or technically even a laser. When you're standing in front of it in the normal operating position, X always moves left to right, and Y always moves front to rear. So, Sorry, there's just no way that I know of to change it. And I do know what you're talking about, because if I'm making something that's longer than the width of my machine, I have to turn it 90 degrees. I have to mount my material 90 degrees, draw out my design, and turn it 90 degrees. So I know that feeling. Okay, let's see. Luis Delgado, good day. Good day. You're welcome, Michael. I hope that helped. Were there any other questions on Texturing Toolpath or anything else that I covered in that video? Wow, this is right at a half hour. I'm actually impressed. No other questions. I don't see any other questions. Um, let's see. I've been promising this. I'm going to give you a little preview of what's going to happen next week. Next week's going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be software. I know, weird, huh? I'm going to be actually out in the shop. 2 years ago this month, I built my Gatton CNC, and I'm going to do a 2 year review after 2 years of using this puppy. I'm going to review the kit, my building experience, um, my opinion on how the build went, the quality of the kit, the quality of the building process, anything I would have done different, and answer a bunch of questions that are repeatedly asked about some of the materials that are used and some of the methods that are used to assemble it. And I'm going to do a spoiler alert right here and right now. The review is going to be very positive. Um, this is a little bit of inside baseball, and I'm going to mention it in the video as well. I have been approached by 2 different CNC manufacturers wanting to send me a CNC and do a review on it and do videos for them. And in both cases, I've turned them down because they don't have anything to offer me that's better than what I have. Well, one of them does have something to offer me that's better, but they're not interested in investing 5 figures. So the review is going to be positive. So there's that spoiler alert. So if there are no more questions, I guess we'll go ahead and we'll end this one here. So next week, look for my review on the Gatton CNC kit and the Gatton CNC build, and I will be doing a live Q&A on the Gatton CNC build. Jim, do me a favor and hit me up on he's asking about prices. I really don't want to get into prices because there is no set price. I mean, go ahead and PM me, Jim, and I'll let you know what I spent on it. But, if somebody comes along in 3 years and sees this video going, oh, well, that's all it cost? Yeah, 3 years ago, that's what it cost. And again, I built mine 2 years ago, so any price I quote now is just irrelevant. So I will put it to you this way. All in with, all in with VCarve Pro, Mach 3, everything, including software, I'm in under $2,000. So that's about all I can say. Your mileage will vary. Prices have gone up on a lot of things. But I'm in for under $2,000. So, hopefully that helps, Jim. So, with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and back on out of here, and we'll see you next week with the Gatton CNC review and live Q&A number 12. And y'all have a good one. Get out there and make some chips. And just basically, y'all take care.